You're watching a military parade rehearsal of Russian troops in preparation for Russia's May 9 Victory Day.
There are speculations that the country will declare an all-out war in Ukraine as the country celebrates the 77th anniversary of its 1945 victory over Nazi Germany. More details on this later in the news. Good evening. I am CJ Hirro.
And I am Nina Ricci, Alagao, Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. And now for the headlines.
European Union proposes ban on Russian oil imports and state-owned broadcasters. Threat from North Korea escalating as it continues missile tests, according to Pentagon. Millions in Beijing urged to work from home to fight COVID-19 outbreak. Colombia extradites drug lord Otoniel to the U.S. And robot chef imitates human eating process to create tastier food.
The European Union has taken another step to reduce dependency on Russian oil. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has unveiled new sanctions against Russia.
And this is why we will phase out Russian supply of crude oil within 6 months and refined products by the end of the year. Thus, we maximize the pressure on Russia, while at the same time, and this is important, we minimize the collateral damage to us and our partners around the globe, because to help Ukraine, we have to make sure that our economy remains strong. Mark Europe Day.
Von der Leyen went on to say Europe is taking steps to keep Russian propaganda from being broadcast in the EU.
We're banning 3 big Russian state-owned broadcasters from our airwaves. They will not be allowed to distribute their content anymore in the European Union in whatever shape or form, be it on cable, via satellite, on the internet, or via smartphone apps. We have identified these TV channels as mouthpieces that amplify Putin's lies and propaganda aggressively.
There's a new display outside of the National Museum of Military History of Ukraine in Kyiv. On the street in front of the building is a collection of mangled Russian war equipment. This is stuff that has been collected since Moscow's conflict with Kyiv. It has been put on display for people to see. Combat veteran Pavlo Netasov hopes that through the display, people will understand what is happening with the war as it's going on in reality. He doesn't want people to, or in the future, to say it did not happen.
Russia dismissed as nonsense speculations that it will declare an all-out war in the Ukraine or in Ukraine in the coming days. Moscow has continuously denied it as war. Instead, it refers to the conflict as a special military operation to demilitarize or denazify Ukraine. However, Western officials insisted that President Vladimir Putin could use the 9th of May Victory Parade to announce an escalation of military action. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov retorted that there's no truth to the speculations at all. He added that there is no chance Putin will make an official war declaration on May 9, saying the widespread news about him doing so is just rumors. But UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace worried that the Moscow parade, which commemorates the defeat of the Nazis and the end of the Second World War, might be used to drum up support for a mass mobilization of troops and renewed push into Ukraine. Aside from the annual parade in Moscow, there were also some media reports that the Kremlin plans another parade in Mariupol, a city that is now almost under Russian control.
U.S. Major General Joe Hartman said that Washington sent its cyber forces to Lithuania to help defend against threats from Russia. Hartman, who serves as the commander of the U.S. Cyber Force, told reporters their deployment in Lithuania is directly related to the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. According to the Bloomberg News website, the mission involved specialists arriving at a country following its invitations, where cyber forces can networks with the goal of building the host country's resilience and share any new information about threats with government and private industry circles back in the U.S. The U.S. previously deployed its cyber teams to countries including Estonia and Ukraine due to the threat posed by Russia. The deployment to Kyiv was extended amid the looming threat of a full-scale conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The specialists were pulled back in February once Moscow's special military operation became clear.
According to the Pentagon, the threat North Korea poses has been increasing following another ballistic missile test on Wednesday. The latest missile launch comes about 2 weeks before U.S. President Joe Biden is set to embark on his first Asia tour that will take him to South Korea and Japan. Pyongyang has conducted 14 weapons tests since January. They include firing an intercontinental ballistic missile at full range for the first time since 2017. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby says that has them concerned.
I think with each test, Court, they learn, even if it's a failure. And again, we're still assessing this one, so I'm not going to get into the details of it. But with each test, they learn. With each test, they try to improve, and sometimes they actually do. So when we talk about greater, I think that's what we're all talking about. And we would agree that the threat from North Korea continues to increase because they continue to test, because they continue to learn, because they continue to adapt their program. It would be foolish not to assess that the threat they're posing is actually increasing over time.
While overseeing a huge military parade last week, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed to develop his nuclear forces at the fastest possible speed. He also warned of possible preemptive strikes. According to analysts, this could be seen as a signal to South Korea's President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol, who has threatened a preemptive strike on Pyongyang.
The Uniteam tandem of former Senator Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. and Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte Carpio sustained its lead in poll surveys released days before the national and local elections. Okta Research Group's most recent pre-election survey shows that Marcos and Duterte maintained a wide gap from their closest rivals. Both the presidential and vice presidential aspirants saw a slight increase in their preferential rating in the survey conducted from April 22 to 25. 58% of those surveyed said they will vote for Marcos, while Vice President Leni Robredo got 25%. Manila Mayor Isko Moreno Domagoso got 8%. Senator Manny Pacquiao has 5%, while Senator Panfilo Lacson got 2%. Other presidential aspirants, namely Caliodi de Guzman, former presidential spokesperson Ernie Abella, Faisal Mangondato, Jose Montemayor Jr., and former National Security Advisor Norberto Gonzalez, received about 1%. For the vice presidential race, Mayor Sara Duterte got 56%, while Senate President Vicente Soto III settled for second with 22%, and third was Senator Francis Kiko Pangilinan with 16%. The Okta survey results are no different from the last pre-election survey conducted by Pulse Asia from April 16 to 21st. In the said survey, Marcos got 56% compared to VP Robredo's 23%. Senator Manny Pacquiao, meanwhile, overtook Mayor Isko for the third spot. Rounding off the top 5 was Senator Lacson with 2%. As the campaign period comes to an end, candidates in both national and local posts ramp up their efforts to gain the favor of the voters.
President Rodrigo Duterte declared Monday, May 9, a special non-working holiday across the country to give way for the conduct of the national and local elections. Under Proclamation number 1375, President Duterte said there is a need for such declaration to enable the people to properly exercise their right to vote, subject to the public health measures imposed by the government. The proclamation was issued by Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdea and was signed today by the President.
The Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, opposed proposals from the Department of Health to also assign polling centers as vaccination sites on the day of the election on May 9. COMELEC Commissioner George Garcia said the poll body wants the people to just focus on the elections. He explained that such a proposal may cause confusion to the voters, especially those who are not vaccinated. In particular, Garcia said unvaccinated individuals might think that vaccination is required before they could cast their votes. He nonetheless said the Department of Health has not formally communicated its proposal with COMELEC.
A mothballed nuclear power plant built near a fault line and volcanoes during former President Ferdinand Marcos's regime could be revived if his son wins next week's presidential election. The $2.2 billion Bataan plant was left dormant after the former strongman was toppled in 1986. Even before the Chernobyl nuclear accident sealed its fate, there were concerns about Bataan's design and location. The plant sits on the coast 18 meters above sea level in an area regularly shaken by earthquakes. Yet Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has vowed to speed up the adoption of nuclear power if he is elected and has left open the possibility of resuscitating his father's failed venture. Marcos Jr., also a fan of wind, solar, and geothermal technology, sailed a South Korean proposal to rehabilitate the Bataan plant should be revisited. Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusi told a Senate hearing in 2020 that studies by South Korean and Russian experts showed it was possible to get the 620-megawatt plant working again, but it would cost $1 billion and at least 4 years to upgrade the facility. Outgoing President Rodrigo Duterte issued an executive order earlier this year, making nuclear power plant of the country's planned energy mix. Supporters of nuclear power say the technology offers a cleaner option to help meet demand, but critics argue that renewable sources such as wind and solar are cheaper and safer to produce in a country hit by earthquakes, typhoons, and volcanic eruptions. Coming up, millions in China capital Beijing urged to work from home to fight COVID-19 outbreak. Colombia extradites drug lord Otoniel to the U.S. And more than 1,000 Iraqis rushed to the hospital due to sandstorm. Mata ng Agila International will return after this break.
Portion.
Pag nagkaroon ako ng problema, halimbawa, kanino ko lalapit?
Lumapit ka sa watcher ni Konsehal Pula.
Huwag. Kung may problema, sa grupo namin, ni Kusyal Puti ka lumapit.
May pula para siguradong walang dayaan.
Puti, para sigurado walang problema.
Kapag mayroong tanong o kung may problema habang bumoboto, lumapit lamang sa Board of Election Inspector. Sila lang ang pwedeng tumulong sa inyo. Wala nang iba.
Talaga? Salamat naman.
Ano ba problema mo?
Paano po ako magkakajowa?
Mamili kayo sa kanilang dalawa. Hey! Pero kung ako sa'yo, bibiliin ko yung may dalang regalo. Ano kayo magandang regalo? Siguro balot. Oo. Balita ko sa 10.
for Business, giving MSMEs the latest market trends and business opportunities. Open for Business, only on Net25.
Ay lalabas natin ang angking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Watching Mata ng Agila International. As millions of people in Beijing return to work today, some districts also encouraged residents to work at home, while dozens of subway stations across the city remained closed. Beijing reported 50 local virus cases today after it said people in its most populous district, Chaoyang, should work from home. Those in the area who need to visit their offices were encouraged to drive themselves and avoid gatherings, while some employees in Chaoyang were seen returning to their buildings, scanning their health codes that permit entry to venues. Domestic tourism revenues over the 5-day break were down by more than 40% from a year ago, according to official data. Shanghai, the epicenter of the latest outbreak, reported more than 4,600 infections, mostly asymptomatic, on Thursday. More than 40 cities in China were implementing full or partial lockdowns or measures restricting mobility as of May 3, according to Nomura estimates. Key cities such as Hangzhou and Beijing have also ordered more regular COVID-19 testing. Chinese authorities have pressed on with their zero-COVID policy involving lockdowns and mass testing as they battle the biggest outbreak since the early days of the pandemic.
Meanwhile, Beijing loosened some curbs, one of which is the quarantine policy for international travelers entering the capital. The centralized quarantine for international visitors will be shortened to a 10-day stay in a centralized facility and a week of home isolation, down from the previous 21 days. Government spokesman Xu Heijian said the move was based on the characteristics of the Omicron variant, particularly its shorter incubation period and usually milder symptoms. Officials said close contacts of confirmed cases will also have a shorter centralized quarantine. Other at-risk groups should undergo 7 days of home quarantine or 10 days of home quarantine with 7 days of health monitoring. During quarantine, these people have to receive nucleic acid testing and antigen testing.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be working at home for a while. State Department spokesman Ned Price says the reason is COVID-19. Price says Blinken will no longer deliver a long-awaited speech on China policy scheduled for today. Blinken was among guests who packed into a Washington hotel on Saturday evening for the annual White House Correspondents Association dinner.
Secretary Blinken has tested positive for COVID. The good news is that he is fully vaccinated, he is boosted, he is experiencing only mild symptoms. He will quarantine at home. He will follow CDC guidelines. I know he very much looks forward to returning to the office, returning to his full schedule, and returning to the road just as soon as he is able to do so.
New ways of putting pressure on Russia will be on the agenda when Boris Johnson meets his Japanese counterpart later. Boris and Fumio Kishida are also set to agree on a new defense partnership between UK and Japan. The reciprocal access agreement will allow British and Japanese forces to deploy together for joint exercises, training, and disaster relief. The agreement is the first of its kind that Japan signed with a European country. It will boost the UK's commitment to Indo-Pacific, according to Downing Street. The focus of the Downing Street meeting will be on how to exert pressure on Russia and help allies become less dependent on its oil and gas. Kishida said Japan would utilize nuclear reactors to reduce its dependence on Russian energy. Japan is part of the Western alliance defending Ukraine. As a member of the G7 group of leading economies, it condemns President Vladimir Putin's special military operation on Ukraine and also imposes sanctions on Russia while sending non-lethal military aid to Kyiv. To welcome Kishida's first visit with the Prime Minister in the UK, the official visit will be marked with a Royal Air Force flypast.
Sweden's foreign minister said that a report about Iran's plans to execute a Swedish-Iranian doctor convicted of espionage is extremely worrying. Sources told Iran's semi-official ISNA news agency that Ahmad Reza Jadalali would be put to death on May 21st. Foreign Minister Ann Linde can't help but tweet that Sweden and the EU condemned the death penalty and demanded Jalali's release. Jalali was arrested during a business trip in 2016 and was accused of spying for Israel. The emergency medicine specialist was sentenced to death by a revolutionary court in Tehran after what human rights groups called a grossly unfair trial. Jalali said he was forced to confess while being subjected to torture and other ill treatment, including threats to kill or otherwise harm his children, who live in Sweden with his wife. He also alleged that he was prosecuted solely because of his refusal to use his academic ties in European institutions to spy for Iran. In 2020, he was informed by authorities that his death sentence was about to be carried out. The Norway-based campaign group Iran Human Rights accused Iranian officials of threatening to execute Jalali in retaliation for the war crimes trial of former Iranian judiciary official Hamid Nouri by a court in Sweden.
Polls open across the UK in local and regional elections that could prove historic in Northern Ireland and heap further pressure on embattled Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The contest for the devolved assembly in Belfast could see a pro-Irish nationalist party win for the first time in Northern Ireland's troubled history. With predicted victors Sinn Féin committed to a vote in the province on reunification with Ireland, the results could have huge constitutional implications for the United Kingdom's future. Meanwhile, Premier Johnson is facing a potentially pivotal midterm popularity test. Johnson won a landslide 2019 general election victory by vowing to take Britain out of the EU and reverse rampant regional inequality. Despite making good on his Brexit pledge, the pandemic largely stalled his domestic plans. His position has also been put in jeopardy after his lockdown-breaking parties at his Downing Street office were revealed.
Colombia's President Iván Duque announced that the drug baron leader of the country's biggest crime gang was extradited to the U.S. Duque called Dairo Antonio Isuga, better known as Otoniel, the world's most dangerous trafficker. He said Otoniel's extradition shows no one is above the Colombian state.
Dairo Antonio Isuga David, con cédula 71.980.054.
Muchas gracias. Bien, hemos recibido entonces documento de sustitución. Lucía, ¿puede por favor? Ya creo que podemos, sí. Lucía,
regalen la nuestra, no merecen estar así. Hoy le invitamos a decir lo que más...
Otoniel led the Gulf Clan cartel and is wanted in the U.S. on drug trafficking charges. The Gulf Clan operated in many provinces and made extensive international connections, engaging in drug and people smuggling, illegal gold mining, and extortion. Duque's government captured Otoniel in October after a 7-year manhunt. The operation involved 500 soldiers supported by 22 helicopters. The president clarified that Otoniel will also have to pay for his crimes in Colombia. Duque then thanked the government and U.S. authorities for making the extradition quick and possible.
Este bandido fue extraditado para cumplir las penas de narcotráfico en los Estados Unidos. Pero quiero dejar claridad que una vez cumpla esas condenas, regresará a Colombia a pagar por los crímenes que cometió en nuestro país.
More than 1,000 Iraqis with respiratory ailments were rushed to the hospital today due to a sandstorm, the 7th to hit the country in the past month. Residents of Iraq's 18 provinces awoke once again to a thick cloud of dust blanketing the sky. A health official said hospitals in Al-Anbar province had received more than 700 patients with breathing difficulties. The central province of Salahedin reported more than 300 cases, while the provinces of Diwaniyah and Najaf each recorded about 100 cases. Iraq is particularly vulnerable to climate change, having already witnessed record low rainfall and high temperatures in the past few years. In early April, a government official warned Iraq could face 272 days of dust a year in the coming decades. The Environment Ministry said sandstorms could be addressed by increasing vegetation cover and creating forests that act as windbreaks.
The families of some of the victims of the 2 Boeing 737 MAX crashes are challenging the settlement agreement the aircraft manufacturer reached with the U.S. government. Under the deal, Boeing admitted to committing fraud in exchange for the Justice Department dropping more serious charges against it. Also, Boeing has to pay $2.5 billion in compensation. Relatives of the victims are asking a Texas judge to overturn that deal. A total of 346 people died in the deadly crashes of the new planes flown by Indonesia's Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines. Relatives say instead of fraud, Boeing should be facing manslaughter charges. Paul Norohay lost his wife, 3 children, and his stepmother in one of the crashes. He says the deal doesn't prevent similar accidents from happening in the future.
I would like to see that the U.S. State Department of Justice is responsible enough to make sure that corporations don't get away with murder, that eventually corporations, the senior management within corporations can pay with criminal cases being done against them, so that they can spend years in prison. That's the only way this kind of negligence can stop.
Coming right up, World Health Organization warns of obesity endemic in Europe. Critically endangered cheetah cub dies in Iran. And humans and hippos in a conflict in Democratic Republic of Congo. We have more stories for you when Mata ng Agila International returns.
This ibigay ng ngiti at saya sa bawat kada all over the world. Tara na't ma-inspire at ma-amaze sa kwento ng mga bawat kada na nagwagi sa anumang hamon at pagsubok ng buhay. Itago na mga remote control at tumambay lang dito sa paborito niyong barkada sa umaga, ang Kada Umaga! Dahil kayo ang bida dito.
sa studio o kahit naka-work from home, hindi magpapapigil sa pagtalakay sa napapanahong issue at hanapin ang maiinit na balitang kailangan nating malaman.
Kami pong dalawa ay may sakit. Now, more than ever, kailangan po ninyo ang tamang impormasyon.
Asahan ninyong laging hahanapan ng kasagutan ang lahat ng mga ASPN nyo.
So ngayon, ang pakiusap ngayon, ang Pangulong Duterte sana ay mag-call ng special session ng Kongreso para ito po ay maipasa itong panukala ninyo. Ano po ang balita doon? May update na po ba tayo?
Ano sa palagay nyo? Kasama si Ali Soto at Pat Pidaza. Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 8 ng umaga. Simulcast niyong mapapanood sa Net25 TV, Facebook at YouTube channel. Radyo Agila 1062 AM. Ito ang Net25 Primetime News. Matatag, matapang, matapat kasama sina Alex Santos, Emma Tiglao at Vic De Leon Lima. Mata ng Agila. Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 6 ng gabi.
You are still watching Mata ng Agila International. Transport for London, or TfL, has completed the final phase of public tests for a long-awaited railway line ahead of its projected opening to the public this summer. Our London correspondent, Ryan Florentino, has the details.
The delayed and over-budget Crossrail project will finally open this month, Transport for London has said. The Abbey Wood to Paddington section will open to passengers in late May, although initially trains will not run on Sundays. Known as the Elizabeth Line, it was meant to start running in December of 2018, but the £18.8 billion project has missed multiple targets due to ballooning costs. Journeys between stations like Liverpool Street to Woolwich and Farringdon to Canary Wharf will reduce travel time by half. The opening date is subject to final safety approvals being granted. It is hoped the Queen, who the line is named after, will be involved when the route begins to operate. Construction of Crossrail began at Canary Wharf in May 2009, with tunneling work starting in May 2012. The project had an original budget of £14.8 billion, but the government pledged an extra £4 billion to help it get open. Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who is also chain of TfL, said the Elizabeth Line would make London safer, fairer, greener, and more prosperous. From the United Kingdom, I'm Ryan Florentino for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Obesity knows no borders. These were the exact words of Dr. Hans Henry, WHO Regional Director for Europe. Henry said no single country in Europe and Central Asia could meet the WHO Global Non-Communicable Diseases, or NCD, target of halting the rise of obesity by year 2025. The latest global health report confirmed that being overweight or obese reached epidemic proportions in Europe, causing more than 1.2 million deaths every year. The same study found that excess body fat leads to premature death and is a leading risk factor for disability. WHO said the COVID-19 pandemic intensified and made the obesity problem more pressing, as patients with obesity are more likely to experience complications and death from the virus. Across Europe, being overweight or obese affects 59% of adults, 8% of children under 5, and 1 in 3 children of school age. WHO calls for the obesity problem to be looked at from the perspective of every stage of life, such as better regulation of unhealthy food and drink marketing in digital environments. The health agency said fighting obesity from the early stage would be a thorough approach, as children and adolescents often eat sweets and spend more time in the digital space.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, clears marketing for the first in vitro diagnostic test for early detection of Alzheimer's disease. The FDA says the test is to be used in adult patients aged 55 years and older who present with cognitive impairment and are being evaluated for Alzheimer's disease and other causes of cognitive decline. Dr. Jeff Shuren of the FDA explains how this new test benefits patients and their families.
The availability of an in vitro diagnostic test that can potentially eliminate the need for time-consuming and expensive PET scans is great news for individuals and families concerned with the possibility of an Alzheimer's disease diagnosis. With the authorization of this test, there is a new option that can typically be completed the same day and can give doctors the same information regarding brain amyloid status without the radiation risk to help determine if a patient's cognitive impairment is due to Alzheimer's disease.
The agency nonetheless cautioned that the LumiPulse test carries a risk of false positive results that could lead to unnecessary treatments and stress on patients, as well as false negative results that could delay patient treatment. FDA's decision to authorize the test comes almost 1 year after its controversial approval of Biogen's Alzheimer's disease therapy, or AA-Duelm.
Ethnic Mon people in Thailand's Pathum Thani province take part in their traditional annual rocket firing competition. The bamboo-made Luknu rockets are stuffed with gunpowder, wired to cables, and aimed at targets in the shape of pagodas. Around 1 meter long, the rockets deployed are made from metal and wood and filled with homemade explosives, usually potassium-based. This year's Luknu Rockets event was attended by 1,000 spectators. They were all happy to see the resumption of the event after a 2-year pandemic hiatus.
ทีนี้คณะลูกหนูบางคณะต้องการให้แรงไงต้องการความชนะถ้าต้องวิ่งไกลกว่าเองอะไรเงี้ยก็ผสมดินให้มันแรงขึ้นเนี่ยบางทีเราเปิดมันไม่ทันหรืออาจจะพลาดในด้านการทำให้แตกได้เนี่ยอาตมาเองก็เคยระเบิดไม่ใช่ไม่ระเบิด
At the end of the cable, the rocket zips through the air and hopefully toward the target before careening nose over tail across the swampy ground.
ก็เดี๋ยวขึ้นสายไปตามระดับที่เราตั้งไว้ให้มันพอดีกับลูกหนูเราแล้วก็ให้หนูวิ่งไปจุดแล้วก็วิ่งไปมุ่งหน้าไปยัง
Helpers rush out with red flags to mark where each rocket landed, and judges keep records along the sidelines.
ทีในทีมหรืออุปกรณ์ต่างๆที่ทุกคนร่วมมือร่วมใจกันทำเนี่ยนะคะมันเป็นอะไรที่น่าภูมิใจสำหรับชาวปทุมธานีเราอะค่ะ
Iran's state media reported that 1 of 3 Asiatic cheetah cubs has died days after they were the first of the endangered animals to be born in captivity. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Asiatic cheetahs are critically endangered, and Iran is one of the first countries, or one of the last countries, where they live in the wild. In a statement, the cause of the cub's death was established as congenital malformation of the left lung. And environment officials said the baby had been weak since birth, while the other 2 cubs had been gaining weight. The cubs were born by cesarean section in the Turan Wildlife Refuge, in what the department said was the first birth of an Asiatic cheetah in captivity. A nationwide campaign has been launched to come up with names for the cubs.
Attempts are being made to resolve a dispute between neighbors in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But this isn't the usual neighborhood battle. The conflict is between villagers and hippopotamuses that live on the banks of the Ruzizi River. People who live here fear the animals. At least 7 people have been killed by hippos in the last 3 years. Another half dozen were injured. The semi-aquatic animals have destroyed many hectares of fields and crops as they roam around the countryside.
Tunaishi na viboko hapa, tushaishi navyo kwa shida sana. Hapa fasi tulikuwa nategemea kulima mashamba, tunakomalisha hako mihindi, maharagi, lakini ile fasi yote hatulimaki tena juu ya viboko kuingia mule na vinaharibisha ile mimea yote.
Environmental activists want the government to come up with a plan to protect the giant animals while reducing the danger they pose to the locals. Villagers also want the government to act. They want it to repair the damages caused by the hippos. Next up, Netflix hit with shareholder lawsuit after disclosing subscriber loss. Robot chef imitates human eating process to create tastier food. And Hand of God World Cup jersey auctioned for $9.3 million. Find out more about these stories when Mata ng Agila International returns.
Ayon sa Omnibus Election Code, ang pag-organisa ng mga perya, sabong, boxing o kahit anong kaganapan na may sugal ay isang election offense.
Pwede yan! Nagre-relax lang naman kami.
Bukod sa masamaang sugal, importante din sa alala ng ating buong atensyon. Dapat hindi tayo nadidistract ng mga panalo ko! Pakawalan niyo ako! Hindi na ako ulit! Ako si Mr. Bawal na nagpapaalala sa inyo na ang sugal, election man o hindi, huy! Bawal yan!
A public service message of Net25 for Mata ng Halalan 2022. Matatag, matapang, matapat.
You are still watching Matarang Agila International. And now in business news. A Netflix shareholder filed a suit accusing the streaming TV titan of not making it clear that subscriber numbers were in peril. It says top executives did not tell investors that subscriber growth was slowing due to shared user accounts and stronger market competition. After Netflix announced its quarterly earnings in April, a disclosed drop of just 200,000 users was enough to send shares plunging. This was less than 0.1% of its total customer base. In the current quarter, it anticipates a much larger drop of around 2 million net subscribers. Executives said on an earnings call that they are focused on combating the 100 million households who watch Netflix for free thanks to shared passwords. CEO Gregory Peters said Netflix wasn't trying to shut down sharing, but they're going to ask users to pay a bit more to be able to share. Competition in the streaming TV market, meanwhile, has intensified, with the cost of producing original shows climbing as well. To attract viewers, Netflix is preparing cheaper subscriptions that include advertisements, which it expects to roll out in the next couple of years. The suit filed Tuesday is seeking to represent everyone who owned Netflix shares in the 6 months ending April 19, 2022, and is asking for unspecified cash damages as well as compensation for financial losses.
Ride-hailing and delivery group Uber has made a $5.9 billion loss, mostly due to its stakes in other companies. Uber said practically all of the misfortune was a consequence of the fall in the worth of interests in organizations, including 2 Asian ride-hailing Goliaths, China's Didi and Southeast Asia's Grab. Didi and Grab's shares sank since posting in New York last year. Regardless of the misfortune, Uber's supervisor featured its encouragement in recuperating from the effect of the pandemic. CEO Dara Khosrowshahi said that Uber's outcomes show exactly the amount of progress they've made exploring out of the pandemic and how the force of Uber's foundation is separating their business execution. On a net premise, Uber's first quarter shortfall took off to $5.9 billion from $108 million a year prior, driven by $5.6 billion of drops in the worth of stakes in different organizations, basically Chinese ride-hailing organization Didi. However, CFO Nelson Chai confirmed that Uber has sufficient money to clutch those misfortune-making mistakes, trusting that a superior time will solve them.
Several international corporations warned in quarterly earnings reports about the impact of China's COVID-19 lockdowns to their businesses. Apple, Estée Lauder, and other major U.S.-listed companies faced a number of challenges in addition to China's COVID-19 situation. Despite Apple's restarting production in its final assembly plants in Shanghai, the lockdowns would likely hit the tech giant's sales in the current quarter by $4 to $8 billion, which is substantially more than in the last quarter. The estimated costs made Apple CEO Tim Cook say COVID is difficult to predict. The company also blamed COVID-19 disruptions for affecting consumer demand in China. Though makeup company Estée Lauder made a strong fiscal third quarter, it decided to cut its full-year outlook due to COVID-19 controls in China and inflation. Estée Lauder commented that the resurgence of COVID-19 cases in many Chinese provinces led to restrictions late in the fiscal 2022 third quarter to prevent further spread of the virus. While companies like DuPont expect the situation to improve later in May, they are still expecting a second quarter impact. U.S. businesses also faced a number of domestic challenges. According to Bank of America's propriety model, corporate sentiment among SP 500 companies has fallen to the lowest since the second quarter of 2020.
Researchers at Cambridge University designed and trained a robot chef to taste a dish's saltiness and the myriad of ingredients at different stages of chewing, a process imitating that of humans. The culinary robots can distinguish between food that tastes good and that doesn't. They are also capable of deciding whether more mixing or other ingredients are needed. If robots are to be used for certain aspects of food preparation, it's important that they are able to taste what they're cooking, according to Grigors Shostaki, one of the researchers from Cambridge's Department of Engineering. To map the human taste, the Cambridge researchers trained the robot chef to make omelettes. It then tasted 9 variations of scrambled egg and tomatoes at 3 stages of the chewing process. As the robot prepared the dishes, a salinity sensor that provided the taste readings was attached to the robot's arm. To imitate the chewing process, the team blended the egg mixture and had the robot test the dish again. Researchers said the concept of tasting as you go is a critical approach, as the human perception of taste relies on saliva produced during chewing and digestive enzymes to decide whether the food is enjoyable or not. Moving forward, the researchers will teach the robot to adapt to an individual taste and become an essential part of households.
Have you ever experienced shopping, but you have forgotten your wallet? Or perhaps your digital apps are not working? That seems like a nightmare. But what if you can pay using your hand? WalletMore is a UK-based fintech firm that successfully tested and deployed a rather unique payment system. It uses NFC or near-field communication-based microchip implants that get embedded in your hand. NFC is the contactless payment system used in smartphones. The basic premise of the implant is that when it comes in contact with a specific reader, the reader then sends out an input, usually in the form of a request. The NFC chip reads and processes it, then sends out a response, usually in the form of output. Just like using a Metro card or tokens, you can now pay for shopping using the chip in your hand. To allay fears of security and privacy, WalletMore's NFC chips only become active when they are within the electromagnetic field of a specific kind of a reader. Because the area of such a field is very small, they lie dormant unless they are in use. WalletMore has also addressed concerns on medical ethics. It explained on their YouTube channel that the implant is shipped in a sterilization pouch sealed inside a polymer pouch with an antiseptic and germicide solution. The firm says it has now sold more than 500 of the chips.
The quarterfinals of the 1986 World Cup witnessed English soccer player Steve Hodge loop a ball to his goalie, but intercepted by Argentine soccer legend Diego Maradona. The move allowed Maradona to score one of the most notorious goals against Hodge's team. In a speedster sequence, Maradona got away with using his left hand to palm the ball, and the stadium tunnel erupted with cheers. Argentina beat England in 2-1. Now, the shirt worn by Maradona when he scored the 2 fabled goals was auctioned for $9.3 million, an auction record for any sports memorabilia. So Sotheby's announced the sale via Twitter. While it did not specify the buyer, but said it was a pleasure to have exhibited the shirt for the last 20 years at the National Football Museum in Manchester, England.
Russia said the Morozov art collection has been safely returned after the show proved a runway success in Paris. Nevertheless, the French government held back 2 key paintings due to Western sanctions against Russia. The Morozov collection drew a near record-breaking 1.25 million visitors to the Swiss Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris between September 22 and April 3. In fact, the show proved to be such a success that it was extended from its initial end date of February 22. Built up by brothers Mikhail and Ivan Morozov, the sprawling collection had never been seen before as a whole outside Russia. It features artworks by the likes of Van Gogh, Cézanne, Matisse, and Monet. After Russian President Vladimir Putin sent troops to Ukraine on February 24, the EU prohibited the sale, supply, transfer, and export of luxury goods, including works of art, to Russia. In April, the French Culture Ministry said that 2 pictures in the collection were to remain in France, a portrait owned by a sanctioned Russian oligarch and a work belonging to the Fine Arts Museum in Dnipro, Ukraine. The Ukrainian authorities had asked for the latter painting to remain in France until the situation improves.
In a galaxy far away, Luke Skywalker stumbles upon Princess Leia's plea, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope." The iconic line gave birth to George Lucas's Star Wars cinematic universe. And now, fans are madly excited to see the new Obi-Wan Kenobi TV series starring Ewan McGregor, Hayden Christensen, Joel Edgerton, Bonnie Peace, Moses Ingram, Indira Varma, Rupert Friend, and Sung Kang. The latest story takes place 10 years after the events of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, released back in 2005. With the return of Christensen in the role of Darth Vader, McGregor also reprised his role as Obi-Wan, the Jedi Master. The miniseries, consisting of 6 episodes, will premiere on the Disney Plus streaming service on May 27.
Let's revisit history by looking back at some of the historical events recorded on this day. In 1904, C.Y. Young pitched the first perfect game in modern Major League Baseball or MLB history. A perfect game is achieved when a pitcher retires all the batters he faces in order with no one reaching base. A few decades later, MLB created the C.Y. Young Award to honor the game's best pitcher. In 1961, Alan Shepard Jr. became the first American astronaut to travel in space. He made a 15-minute suborbital flight in the Freedom 7 spacecraft. His flight was 23 days later than that of the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, the first ever man in space. And in 1988, English pop singer and songwriter Adele was born. She is one of the world's best-selling music artists with sales of over 120 million records.
Tonight's broadcast ends with a quote from American poet Lucille Clifton. "One should wish to celebrate more than one wishes to be celebrated."
You know, I see a lot of parallelism between this quote and one's choice to be happy amid even, difficult situations like what we're going through nowadays.
Well, especially now during the age of social media, I think we should learn to focus more on the good things or the reasons to be glad and to be thankful for instead of focusing on the fame culture that it generates.
You don't wait for a good thing to come. You choose for it.
And that's a wrap for tonight's news. Catch the latest updates in our social media channels. I'm CJ Hirro.
And I am Nina Ricci, Alagao, Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.